following a presentation from members of the department, we are going to open it up to general questions and comments. I'm going to ask that you step to the mic. Please identify your name if you want to use just your first name or your whole name. It would be helpful to us to understand and track these comments if we need to refer back to this record. So it is being recorded. Please, as I said, let's be courteous to each other. Let's listen. Let's ask questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Suhr, Commander Correia, and Commander Ali.
Good evening. My name is Greg Suhr. I'm your Chief of Police. And to my left, Commander Rich Correia. He's going to speak to you a little bit about the draft policy and our crisis intervention training. And then to his left is Commander Mikail Ali, who will explain to you the various electronic control weapons, the less lethal weapons that we're considering are being considered. But I'm going to start off with kind of the background on how we got here, what we're considering and what we're not considering. So within 30 days of becoming Chief of Police, I enacted a policy that has been standing since May 27th that basically says that when responding to the call of an armed person who appears to be suffering from a mental illness or is in an apparent altered mental status, or when officers come upon or arrive at the scene of a call and learn that an incident involves an armed person who appears to be suffering from a mental illness or is in apparent altered mental status, the officer shall immediately request a supervisor who shall respond to the scene. In such circumstances, when the person suffering an apparent mental crisis is not a threat to any other person, officers shall observe, maintain a safe distance, and attempt to stabilize the scene until the arrival of the supervisor who shall assume command. Members are reminded again, an officer may not discharge a firearm at a person who presents a danger only to him or herself. This has been the standing policy of the San Francisco Police Department since May 27th of 2011, and since that date, the San Francisco Police Department has not used deadly force on a person in crisis who only posed a danger to themselves. They have created time and distance, which is, I believe, and has been borne out by the major city chiefs as a best practice, so as not to create the circumstance where somebody would be harmed either from the public, the person involved, or the police. Sadly, late last year, there was a circumstance on the Embarcadero where an armed person was not just a danger to himself. He had committed an aggravated assault on a co-worker at the Cho Chocolate Factory. Officers still allowed time and distance to the tune of probably in excess of 10 minutes as the person moved away from the scene, and as the person got to a more populated area, an officer with some crisis intervention training attempted to stop the person's progress. The person came at the officer with an edged weapon, and the officer was forced to use deadly force, killing the suspect, having no other option. So at this point in time, I resurrected the issue of the officers having less lethal weapons as another tool in their toolbox. I've researched best practices pretty extensively. We are not asking for less lethal weapons for the entire police department. We are asking for less lethal weapons for those officers that have had the most training in dealing with people in crisis, our crisis intervention trained officers. Right now that number is about 118 officers, or about 5% of the police department. These are the very same officers that in that bulletin that I just read you, we call to the scene to deal with people in crisis. So it's not unlike other models we have. For instance, if we have a critical instance where you have an armed suspect, a barricaded suspect, a hostage situation, we call officers with specialized training with additional weapons, whether it's SWAT or snipers, whatever, contend with that. These officers we're calling because they have specialized training in how to best deal with people in crisis, and I believe that in fairness to them and to the person that we're dealing with, it'd be nice if they had something short of a firearm. We realize that these weapons are called less lethal because they can, in some instances, cause serious injury or death, but they are certainly decidedly less lethal than a gun, which is what we already have. Police chiefs and other experts around the country recommend slowing down the situation and calling for a supervisor, which we do and have been successful at. Crisis intervention teams and other partnerships with mental health officials can result in more effective handling of these situations. We are undertaking that. That is ongoing. Identifying chronic consumers of police resources, that is underway. Special considerations in dealing with veterans in crisis. We work closely on this, and it's a priority for the mayor. Avoiding over-reliance on weapons such as ECWs, as opposed to hands-on tactics. We do not have ECWs, so it would be impossible at this point in time to over-rely on them. Recognizing real threats to officers that can be posed by persons. Training in tactical disengagement, that's what I spoke to in the bulletin, where we respond and then we stand back rather than rush in. We don't want to create the moment, we want to create time and distance. The importance of training for officers in these encounters, again, Commander Correia will speak to that. The use of force continuance and getting other tools for discussing use of force options, that's where we're here tonight and what's being considered in front of the commission. And then one thing that we talked about a bit at the last meeting was to try and avoid the negative impact on a law enforcement agency where you have what's called a lawful but awful event, such as the one on the Embarcadero. However that shooting might have been in police policy, it's a shooting that I deeply wish wouldn't have happened. We had a lot of upset. Obviously, the family is deeply distraught. This person was in crisis, but the officer had no other option. So anything that we can do to keep the department, I mean, the officers suffer themselves whenever they have to use this sort of force. So a lawful but awful event is something that we'd also like to be able to avoid from the police department. They recommended considering a slow rollout because younger officers are more likely to use the electronic control device, hence the reason that we want it on a small sample size. You have to have a certain amount of seniority to be considered for CIT training, certainly your post-probation, so they go to a senior group of officers just to begin with. Some of the promising practices. Chief Lansdowne recommends immediately dispatching a sergeant and 2 officers, which is pretty much what we do. Philadelphia, they talk about crisis intervention training, not only being a curriculum, but also a bridge between 2 worlds. In this very room, just last Friday night, I spoke to the graduating academy class about the criticality of being able to switch from cop mode to social worker mode and how that's going to save lives. They need to hear it, and they hear it often from me. Chicago's first deputy also recommends CIT along with their ECWs. Indianapolis Chief Lloyd Crow, crossover, they actually send 4 officers. Albuquerque Chief suggests that ECWs are not alone the answer, CIT is not alone the answer, and an equal and applied consideration of both could quite possibly be the solution. New York City Commissioner James O'Keefe, focus on tactics that buy officers time. Obviously, we've had great success with that since last May. And then the Houston Chief, Charles McClellan, suggests treating ECW deployments much the same as we do firearms. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to Commander Correia. One of the things that's been discussed, there were a lot of comments last time that some of the things that folks wanted to see in our policy weren't actually in the new policy. That the general orders of the police department is about 2 inches thick. All those policies are binding on the officers. We have a general use of force, General Order 5.01, copies of it are available. The commander forgot them, we'll make them available. Anyway, the general use of force policy has been standing for quite some time. The ECW, if or when it is obtained as a pilot, would be in what's called the continuum of force, the escalation or de-escalation of what we're allowed to use, and the officers would be then still held accountable to General Order 5.01 for our use of force and all the reporting that goes along with it. So the new order is, as those rules apply, strictly to the ECW, and it's pretty thorough. It's becoming more thorough, and I really did, for one, appreciate the commentary at the microphone and the back and forth last time, because I think both sides had some takeaways. So with that, that's how we got here. That's what we're considering. That's kind of what the picture is around the country. And with that, I will hand it over to Commander Correia to speak to you a little bit about the state of crisis intervention training in the department and where we are with the draft policy.